Whenever Audi Sport tells us it's about to release a new product, I feel as if the entire automotive world draws a collective breath as we wait to see whether they're about to release another brilliant car or a fantastic misfire. They are, if nothing else, quite inconsistent and have dropped probably equal numbers of brilliant bonkers machines and just confusing conglomerations of mismatching parts. I never got a chance to drive the current RS5 until today, but I did drive the old one. It was an absolutely fantastic machine. Sure, deeply flawed in many ways, too heavy, front biased and a little bit light on torque, but it made up for all of that with a wonderfully characterful and utterly bonkers 4.2 litre engine. The change to forced induction in this market segment had actually happened a number of years earlier. The BMW M4 had already braced us for the RS5's change to turbocharging. The truth is that actually it was more of a surprise that the old engine wasn't a 3-litre turbocharged V6 like this, thanks to Audi's long-standing heritage with turbo power plants. But I, for one, am very glad that they persevered with that unit because it was, and remains still, utterly brilliant. There is in truth an awful lot that I really do like about this car. It looks fantastic. It's got a real muscle car stance about it with more than a hint of Mustang from some angles. The front 3/4 in particular. The way that bonnet just sort of meets the front bumper is quite fantastic. Yes, it should really be a little bit lower, but modern safety regulations saw to that. Fortunately, because this was a 2017 car, it is free of petrol particulate filters and that annoying need to adhere to all of the current regulations regarding exhaust noise. So hopefully it should make a half decent sound. We'll find out about that in a little bit. This was actually one of Audi UK's press cars, and it has as such a very nice specification. The exterior is dressed in a beautiful shade called Sonoma Green, and unusually the interior actually has a little splash of colour. It is green stitched and features a mixture of leather, a carbon fibre looking trim, and also this unfortunate vinyl that keeps appearing on every single Audi I test drive. Please, 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 if you're speccing an expensive Audi, especially you Audi UK, can you please put leather on here? However, it does still feel like a very nice place to be, and in some ways time has actually been very kind to this car, particularly on the interior front. The virtual cockpit that I really didn't like on release still feels bang up to date, as it should, and is actually a very nice effective unit and still probably the best of its type that I have used. Similarly, the screen over here in the center of the dash that I really hated when it came out is a little bit on the small side, and mercifully you can actually turn it completely off by pressing a little button down here. It can also be controlled via this small wheel down here, which rotates, moves very much like an iDrive style controller, and has a trackpad in the middle for scribbling in the address. It never really works that well, but it's there and is much, much better than the current system that Audi are using. Even better, the climate controls are physical dials. This setup here is perfect. Audi never ever needed to veer away from this. It's just fine. Steering wheel, similarly Audi brilliant. I love Audi steering wheels. They are a joy to hold, even if they aren't connected to the most communicative chassis. I'm currently driving this car in comfort mode, and I would be lying if I said it was the most comfortable car. You can feel that it is rather firm still, but it's not punishing, at least not yet. Gonna give it some more demanding roads in a minute to find out just how well it copes. Visibility is a little bit of an issue. That bonnet is very high and you feel a little bit claustrophobic in here. You can see out the back all right, but the C-pillar is very chunky and you got something of a letterbox view out the back. This rear view mirror is a frameless item, and indeed the whole interior comes together quite well, and I think I actually prefer over any of the modern Audis that I have driven. And that's just as well, because when these cars came out they carried an official base price of about 62 grand. However, it was very easy to add quite a bit onto the price, as happened with these press cars. This was not a £62,000 car, this was, I believe, more like an £82,000 £1,000 car. And that price for many, I expect, would have been quite difficult to stomach. For that reason, I never really ever saw these in anywhere near the numbers that I did the BMW M4 or probably even the Mercedes equivalents of the time. One of the other big changes to the powertrain for this generation of car was the adoption of the 8-speed automatic for the RS lineup. There were actually 3 different gearboxes you could have in an A5 of this generation. Certain entry-level cars in some markets you could actually have a manual still, but most others got either an S-tronic or the auto. Confusingly, this is when Audi started giving the high-end cars the auto. So the 3-litre diesel, and then I believe both the S and RS got the auto, with the rest getting the S-tronic dual clutch. The reason for that, I'm told, is that the auto was just that much better at handling the torque. And it's got plenty of that. Whoa, this thing is rapid, and I'm in comfort mode still. That is seriously impressive. Just like with the BMW M4, the headline power figure of the new RS5 was pretty much identical to the old one. It was the torque that changed. It grew by officially over 120 pound-feet, and in practice, possibly a little bit more than that too. With this generation of car, a lot of people were quite hopeful that Audi had finally committed to making something a little bit more sporty that could genuinely take on a BMW on its home turf, namely the back roads of Britain and the many racetracks of Europe. It is indeed a lighter car than its predecessor, but it's still, in the grand scheme of things, rather heavy. 1,750 kilos in the real world, or to put it another way, about 100 to 150 kilos more than an equivalent M4. That's a lot. However, you do get the benefit of Audi's trademark Quattro all-wheel drive system, here in a generally rear-biased configuration with a Sport Quattro differential, I think, and it does feel like a much, much better put-together product than the Beamers. Now, this car does have individual drive mode should you want that, but for the purpose of this test, what I'm going to do is I'm going to whack it into dynamic, which should change pretty much everything in the car. In fact, if you go to the individual menu, you can change the engine and gearbox mapping, suspension, steering, the sport differential, the engine sound, and even the adaptive cruise control. Now, one thing I can tell you, whacking this car into dynamic, yeah, the suspension setup, too bouncy, not right for a British B road, but let's see how she tackles this. Oh, the engine sounds actually pretty good for a little 3-litre V6. Oh, these were the days when we could actually have decent sounding engines still. And it's a very, very large car, and I'm going to be very careful here because the last time I drove an RS5, I actually jumped a car by accident down here. I don't like doing that on tests because that's very, very hard on a car. Did not realise how brutal this little bridge was, but it's a good opportunity to kind of slow down a little bit and then put my foot down. So there is definitely some turbo lag. And I have to say, I did experience the RS4 some years ago with this same powertrain, and I did not like it. But I'm enjoying this a lot more than I thought I would. Oh, it's got pull, real serious pull. But what it does not have, even in dynamic mode, any feel through the steering. Absolutely nothing. None. It has taken a vow of silence, and it intends to keep it. Once you do start really pressing on as well, that initial shove kind of vanishes as the weight starts to take over, which is a real shame because there is so much I really, really do like about this setup. Gearbox just isn't quite as responsive as a dual clutch would be, and that is a shame. It's the downshift in particular. There's just that moment. Upshifts are not too bad, and when you're on it, it's all right. Put your foot down and it just hasn't got that punch, it hasn't got that snap of a dual clutch system, or, if I'm being honest, a well set up 8-speed either. Kind of disappointing. I actually could do with a little bit more of that noise too, because it is not a bad sound, there's just not a lot of it. On roads like this, you do feel like you are taking up all of the space, because to be perfectly honest, you are. At least it's quite happy to go into reverse, which some modern Audis are not. Certainly a much easier car to put the power down in, much more predictable than, say, the M4, which in its early days in particular was something of a wild child. You've also got heads-up display in this car, which is very nice to have. In truth, the RS5 is something of an enigma. The powertrain is much more exciting than I recall it being in the RS4, and although it's certainly nowhere near as exciting as the V8 that it replaced, it's certainly effective. I mean, this thing is savagely fast, but the suspension just, I mean, you can probably hear my camera rattling and shaking around. It's far, far better in comfort mode. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just set on individual quickly, which has the suspension there, and I'm going to put the engine sound into dynamic because I do like it. And here we go. So we're just in 4th gear. We're at 30 mile an hour, and we're just going to come out. It does take a moment to get going, and it is vastly smoother in comfort mode, but then the steering, it seems, is nearly even worse. Oh yes, dynamic suspension ruins everything, and the car can cross ground at a quite serious pace when you've got it in comfort, but I just don't trust it because there's no feedback, so I can't tell when it's about to let go. Really is a shame, and it's also, for a new driver, I think it's a little bit dangerous because there's no warning, or there wouldn't be, when this thing was all going to go wrong. And with all-wheel drive, this much power, and big sticky tyres, yeah, it's going to go wrong in a big old fashion. This car, as you might have noticed from the exterior shots, is riding on 19s where it was supplied with 20s. There's a couple of reasons for that, and the owner prefers it that way, and actually I think I would keep it on the 19s too, because the 20s it would ride even worse. I don't hate the RS5 at all. I just wish that it had a little bit more engagement in it, a little bit more steering feel. Actually, no, I'm not. Who am I kidding? I want it to have a lot more steering feel. I want it to have steering feel, full stop. It just does not have that. The powertrain is okay, not quite as sharp as it could be, not as bad as some of the modern turbo units that Audi have made, which they've, I think, deliberately made quite laggy. And it looks awesome. I mean, it's the sort of car that I could perfectly see how people would just go in and buy it without having to drive one. Be like, yeah, cool, that's the car for me, I want it. And as an all year round car, I guess it's going to be a lot more usable than something like an M4. I'm not a big fan of the M4, however, dynamically, it is this car's superior. It just is, no way around it. And I know the engine is perfectly competent, but that 6,500 RPM is where the red line starts. It's just not good enough. That old one was just a really, truly magical thing, and this is effective. It's efficient. It's a good engine. But the old one had a great engine, and that made up for a lot. So the RS5, if I'm being honest, it's a bit of a miss from me, and that's a shame. But thank you all for watching anyway. Please like, comment below. Tell me what you think of the car. Would you have one? Have you driven one? Do you own one? And I'll hopefully see you for the next one. Bye-bye.